In this video, you're going to learn about destructuring in JavaScript. Destructuring allows us to unpack values from objects and arrays. It's a super handy thing to be able to do. Now, it works with arrays, though I don't find it particularly useful with arrays, but with objects, it is a very useful tool. Let's go ahead and kick things off by completely emptying index.js. All of this stuff is documented in previous lectures, so we don't need it around anymore. And we're going to start with a simple object that we can explore destructuring on. Let's go ahead and create a to-do object like the to-do objects we have in our to-do application. Let's make a const. I'm going to call this one to-do, and we're going to set it up with those three properties that our to-do objects have. We'll have an ID, and we can just pick whatever value we like. We can just jam some characters in a string. Next up, we're going to have our text for the to-do. We can use something like pay the bills. And then finally, we have our completed status. I'll set completed equal to false. Awesome. So now we have our to-do object in place, and down below, we're going to explore destructuring. In JavaScript, we're often passing objects around, and this is a good thing because objects can hold multiple discrete values. In the end, though, we often work with those individual values, and it can be a bit annoying when they're all on an object, so I'll find myself pulling things off like this. Const text equals to-do.text, making it a bit easier to work with the text data, so I don't have to constantly reference the object where it's from. Then down below, const completed equals to-do.completed, and right away we can start to see the problem. For every value we want off of that object, we have to add another line. In the end of the day, it's nice because we have individual variables we can work with. The problem is that this is going to require quite a few new lines, especially if we have a more complex object with more properties. With destructuring, though, this is no longer a problem. Destructuring is going to allow us to pull as many things off of an object or an array as we like and store those in variables. Let's go ahead and mess around with things. First up, let's log out text and completed, console.log text, then down below, console.log completed. And if I save the program, I would just expect to see our string and our Boolean printing, and that's exactly what we're getting. Now let's go ahead and explore how we can do the exact same thing we're doing here, but with destructuring on a single line. So right away, we're going to create a const, although we could use let here as well. Either one would work. And then what we're going to do is set up some curly braces, and we'll talk about what goes inside of here in just a moment. The next thing we're going to do is set it equal to, and right here, we're going to reference the object to do, not a property off of that object, just the object itself. Inside of here, we can now name the individual properties we want to access. So for example, I could say I want text and I want completed. So right here, we have a comma-separated list of things, and you'll notice that this looks pretty similar to the curly braces we use in our import statement when we're grabbing those named exports. For example, if I go over to one of our applications like the Notes app and open up edit.js, we can see that inside of curly braces, we're naming the things we want access to. The same thing is true with destructuring. So this one line is going to create two new variables, text and completed. It is going to get the text value from to-do.text. It's going to get the completed variable value from to-do.completed. Now we can go ahead and actually save the program. And once again, we're going to see the exact same output. We still have an individual variable text whose value is the string pay the bills, and we still have the variable completed whose value is false. Inside of here, we can actually customize things a bit further. One thing we can do is change the name of the local variable created. So for example, let's say I want a local variable called note text, but I want its value to come from to-do.text, and I still want to take advantage of destructuring. To get that done, after text, I just use a colon, and then I pick the local variable name. So in this example, I'm going to stick with to-do text. So in this case, we're creating a new const called to-do-text, and its value is coming from the to-do.text property. So right here, we no longer have a local text variable. We've decided to override that to to-do-text. If I save the program in this state, we're going to see that we're still getting the correct output in the console. Pay the bills is showing up. One more thing we can do is we can provide a default value for something we're destructuring if it doesn't actually exist on the object. For example, let's say we want to pull off another property. So after completed, comma, space, and we're going to call this one something like details, something that does not exist on the to-do object that we're actually destructuring. If we were to log out details right now, we would get undefined. So console.log, details, save the file, things rerun in the background, and what do we get after false? We get undefined. Inside of here, though, we can pick a default value should there not be a details property. To do that, after details, we just set it equal to, kind of like we do with default arguments, and we pick the value we want to use. We could use an object, I could use an array, I could use a Boolean value. In this case, we could use a string as well. Any value works. I'm just going to say something like no details provided. Now we have a default value for details. So in this case, we're creating a new constant variable called details. We're trying to fetch its value from to-do.details. If that doesn't exist, we use this string instead. Since it doesn't exist, I would expect the string to print. If I save things and they rerun, we can see that is exactly what we end up getting. So with destructuring, we have a lot of options available to us to get things exactly as we want them. One last clarification I should make is that we can combine these two, picking a new variable name and a default value. To do that, you just use the colon right here. So colon other details, for example, that would now create a local other details variable while still looking for details on the to-do object. The last feature of destructuring worth noting is that we can use the rest operator inside of here. So right here, for example, I could say I want an object with the rest of the things I have not chosen to destructure. Now on the to-do object, what's not being destructured? Well, it's just ID. We are destructuring text, we do that right here. We are destructuring completed, we do that right here. So the only thing left to actually grab would be ID. To use the rest operator, we use ... and then we pick a name for the new object. So in this case, we could use others. Now we're going to be creating a new object with just that one property, ID. Down below, we could actually print this to see it. Console.log others. Over in the terminal, things are going to refresh, and what do we get? We get our object showing up with that single property ID. If we had other properties on here that we were not destructuring, those would show up on the others object as well. Destructuring is a super useful technique when it comes to working with objects, and there will be a challenge in this video where you're going to have to use them with the projects we've created already. Before we do, though, I want to talk about how we can also use destructuring with arrays. It's not as popular. I don't find myself doing it as often when writing applications, whereas with destructuring, I find myself doing it pretty much all the time. So let's go ahead and start off by creating an array that we can mess around with. Right here, I'm going to create a new const for my age array, and we're just going to store an array of ages. Let's have 65, 0, 13, and 21. Now the goal, once again, is to be able to pull things off of this array and store them in individual variables. That's the exact same thing we did above, but with objects. To do this, let's go ahead and set up the other line. This is where we're actually going to use destructuring. So const or let, either works. Instead of setting up curly braces, which destructures an object, we set up square brackets, which destructures an array. Then we set that equal to, and we provide the name of the array we're trying to destructure. So in this case, we are destructuring age, and we can access those values right here, giving them variable names. So let's say we want to create a new variable for the first item in the array. All we do is we name that right here, first age. Now we have access to first age, and the reason that it's grabbing the first value is because this is the first thing listed in here. I could add a second one on to grab the second value. So right here, second age, for example. Now we could go ahead and actually print both of these using console.log. Console.log, printing first age, then on the next line, the same thing, but for second age. If we go ahead and save the program, we should see both of those ages printing, and that's exactly what we're getting. We're getting 65 and we're getting 0. So the order we destructure with our arrays is important. The first one gets the first value, the second one gets the second value. You can also skip values. So let's say I don't want the third one, but I do want the fourth. All I would do for that is use a comma space, then provide nothing, move right on to the next one, comma space, then name the fourth one. I could call this something like last age. So in this example, I'm creating the first age variable for the first item. the second age variable for the second item. I'm doing nothing for the third item, and then for the fourth item, I'm calling that one last age. Down below, console.log, printing last age to the console. I'm going to save things, and we should see 21 printing, and that is exactly what we end up getting. With array destructuring, we can also choose to provide default values like we did for object destructuring, and we can also choose to use the rest parameter. Let's go ahead and set those up to see how they work. So for example, let's say there was no fourth item on the array we were destructuring, even though we're trying to grab it and store it in the last age variable. In this case, once again, we're going to end up getting undefined for last age. If we wanted to set up a default value, we would just set it equal to. Right here, we could pick a value. I'll go ahead and use 123. Now, if I save things, we're going to see 123 printing, since that was the default value provided. So it's going to look on the age array for a fourth item. It's not going to find it. It's going to fall back to the default. Remember, the last thing we can do is the rest parameter. So right here, let's say that we want to grab the first item off the array. Then we want to put everything else in some other array. We can use after a comma, ... other ages or something else. Then other ages is going to store everything we haven't destructured. In this case, it is going to store 0 and 13, since the only thing we destructure is the first item in the array. So down below, we can remove the two console.logs for variables that no longer exist, and we can add one in for the new array we just created, other ages. If we go ahead and save things, we should see that array with 0 and 13. That is exactly what we end up getting. It's important to note that we can use destructuring with objects and arrays when we have a local variable like these. We can also use it inside of function arguments. So let's go ahead and wrap up this video by talking about that. Then we'll move into the challenge for the video. What I'm going to do is create a new function. Let's go ahead and add that up above for our to-do example. I'll remove the commented out lines. We can just create a const. I'm going to call this something like print to do, and we're just going to set it equal to a function, and this function is going to take in our to do object. So if I was going to call it, I would call it like this. I'd call print to do, I'd pass in the to do, and now it has access to all of the information, and it can do something with it. Right here, let's just use console.log to print some stuff. Inside of a template string, I'm going to print first the text, then whether or not it's been completed. So right here, I will interpolate the to-do.text. Then I could put something like a colon and a space. And last up, I'll add the completed status. So to-do.completed. Now we know what's going to happen here. We've ran programs like this plenty of times before. We're going to see the output we expect. Up at the top, we get pay bills, colon space false. The thing is though, we have to grab all of those properties off of the to-do argument. Now we could use destructuring in the way we already know by adding another line right here, setting up the const, then using destructuring, but we don't actually even need to do that. We can destructure right here in the arguments list. Instead of providing a name for this first argument, we simply set up the curly braces. So this would be for destructuring an object. We would use the square brackets if the argument was an array and we wanted to destructure that. Since we are passing in an argument, let's go ahead and destructure this. Now we have access to all of the same stuff we had access to right inside of here. So for example, I could destructure the text property off of that object. I could also destructure the completed value. Now down below, instead of accessing it on the object, we just grab text, and then right here, we just grab completed. So this is a very powerful thing to be able to do. And when it comes to using object destructuring, I usually find it comes up in a situation like this. A function takes in an object with a whole bunch of properties, when in reality, it just needs one or two values off of that object. Over in the terminal, we can see that when this code runs, we get the exact same output we were getting before. Using destructuring in function arguments is a really great tool, and we have access to everything we had access to down here. I could rename things, I could provide default values, I could set up the rest parameter to grab the rest of the properties that I'm not destructuring. Now I'd like you to do a bit of destructuring on your own. Let's go ahead and close down all of our open files and collapse all of those directories. What you're going to be doing is making a few changes to two files in the to-do application. In the source directory, one of the files is going to be filters.js, and the other file is going to be views.js. So in filters.js, what I want you to do is destructure the updates object right here, extracting search text and hide completed right off of it. That'll allow you to use the new search text variable instead of accessing it off of the updates object here, and same is true down below for hide completed. You'll be able to use the new hide completed variable instead of accessing it off of the updates object. So this is the first of two situations where I'd like you to use destructuring. The other one is over in views.js. Over here, we're going to do a bit of destructuring inside of render to-dos. Down below on line 7, we call getFilters. GetFilters returns an object. You're going to be destructuring that object, grabbing a search text and a hide completed variable. Then you'll need to use those variables wherever we use the filters object currently, which would be inside of this filter callback function. So take some time to knock that out in both scenarios. First up in filters.js, destructure the updates argument. Then in views.js, destructure the object that comes back from getFilters. Finally, start up the application in the terminal and test things out in the browser. Make sure that all the code still works as expected. Pause the video, knock that out, and when you're done, click play. How'd that go? Let's go ahead and kick things off in filters.js. The goal here is to destructure this argument. Now, this argument isn't an array. If it was, we would use square brackets to destructure it, but it's an object, so we're going to use curly braces to destructure it. Now we can name the individual things we would like to pull off of that object. The first one is going to be search text, and the second one is going to be hide completed. Now, down below, we can use those directly. So there is no longer an updates variable in scope. So I'm going to remove updates with the dot, just referencing search text. I'll do the same thing down below where we grab the value to assign it to the filters object. Down below that, we have the hide completed if statement. I'm going to remove updates dot from that, and down below, perfect. So now the set filters function is using the destructured variable values in the function body. We can save this file and move on to the other file. Over here, I wanted you to destructure what comes back from getFilters. So right here, we're no longer going to create the filters variable. Instead, we're going to destructure the object and create two variables. The first one is going to be called search text, and the second one is going to be called hide completed. Now we have these variables directly accessible, so we're going to have to change anywhere in the program we were using filters. That was right here and right here. I'm going to remove the filters dot, just referencing the search text string, and I'm going to do the same thing down below, just referencing the hide completed Boolean variable. That is it for our code changes. We can now save views.js. Over inside of the terminal, I'm going to go ahead and shut things down, switch away from the boilerplate directory over to that app, cd ... /to-do app. Then I'm going to start up the application, npm run dev-server. Once the app is up and running, we'll just refresh things in the background to connect to the new application, and hopefully things still work as expected. Right here, we can see that everything is working as expected. The one function rendered to-dos has to do with the sorting, so let's go ahead and test that out. I'll hide completed. It seems to work. I'll use the filters search box to search for test. It does not match any items, so that seems to be working pretty well as well. The other place we changed code in filters.js had to do with setting the filters. We just set both filters, so clearly that code is working too. So there we go. We now have a bit of experience using destructuring. That's where we're going to be stopping for this video, and that's where we're going to be stopping for this section. In this advanced section, we covered a lot of information. We started off by talking about Babel, then we talked about Webpack and the module system, then we refactored all three of our applications, and finally, we learned about a few new features available to us. All of this gives us a better setup for creating real-world JavaScript applications going forward. Over in the boilerplate directory, to wrap this one up, we're just going to delete everything from index.js as this is no longer needed. Now, I am going to keep this content around in the zip for this lecture, So if you weren't able to get this working for some reason, you are going to be able to find this code over inside of the lecture zip. All right, I'm going to save the project for the final time. That is it for this section. I'll see you next time.